My husband looked me dead in the eyes in a parking lot at 11:30 on a Wednesday night with another woman standing 2 feet behind him and told me that our children did not matter to him anymore. Those were not the exact words. The exact words were worse. He said, "Stop dragging the kids into this, Sarah. Vanessa's future and her studio matter more to me right now than Lily's little summer camps or Leo's tantrums. She gives me freedom. You give me obligations." He said it the way someone orders coffee, flat, practiced, like he had rehearsed it in the car on the drive over and decided it sounded reasonable. Vanessa, 26 years old, our daughter's vocal coach, the woman who had sat at my Thanksgiving table 4 months ago and complimented my cranberry sauce, stood behind him in a cheap faux leather jacket, smiling like she had just been handed a prize. She did not even have the decency to look away. Somewhere above us, a neighbor in the apartment building pulled back a curtain. The red LED light from the building sign blinked on and off above the entrance painting, David's face, in pulses of cold crimson. Nobody said a word. I stood there in my wool coat, the one I had bought on clearance at Nordstrom Rack 3 years ago, because I was saving for Lily's college fund, and I looked at the smear of drugstore lipstick on his collar, a shade of red that did not belong to me, had never belonged to me, on a man I had belonged to for 15 years. Then I did something that made David flinch. I smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile that sits on your face like the edge of a razor. I smoothed the front of my coat, took one step backward, and said, "Drive safe, David." That was all. 4 syllables and a smile that told him nothing and everything at the same time. He expected tears. He expected the scene he had already scripted in his head, the hysterical wife, the public meltdown, the proof that I was the unstable one. He got silence and a steady gaze, and a woman who looked at him the way she would look at a column of numbers that did not add up. The red light blinked again. On, off, on, off. I memorized that light. I would see it again in nightmares for months, but standing there watching it flicker across the jawline, I had kissed 10,000 mornings, a part of my brain that had spent 20 years analyzing balance sheets and tracing decimal points, clicked into a mode I did not know I had. Not grief, not rage. Something colder. Something with very sharp teeth. He did not know it yet, but that parking lot was the last place David would ever have the upper hand. Within 6 months, he would lose the house, the savings, the children, and the woman in the cheap jacket. He would lose everything he thought he owned, including the parts of me he believed he still controlled. And I would be the one holding the receipts. Before we continue, if you believe every mother deserves to protect her children and her dignity, please consider subscribing. It is free, and it helps stories like this reach the women who need to hear them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up in that parking lot with a smile made of ice and a spine made of steel, you need to know the woman I was before. You need to know who Sarah Mitchell was for 15 years before she learned what her husband was really made of. David and I met at a corporate mixer in downtown Chicago when I was 29 and still believed in the kind of love they write about in anniversary cards. He was charming the way a storm is charming, all energy and focus and the ability to make you feel like you are the only person in a room of 200. We married within a year. I wore my mother's pearl earrings and cried during my own vows. Lily arrived 2 years later, fierce and loud, from her very first breath, a girl who came into the world fists first and never stopped swinging. Then Leo, our surprise, our gentle boy, with his father's dark eyes and my quiet stubbornness, who arrived when Lily was 7 and I was 39 and already starting to feel invisible in meetings at work. We built a life in Evanston, a quiet suburb north of Chicago, with good schools and sidewalks shaded by oak trees. A 4-bedroom colonial with a yard that needed mowing every Saturday and a kitchen with granite countertops I had picked out after comparing prices at 4 different showrooms. I handled the finances, all of them. The mortgage payments, the insurance premiums, the utility bills that arrived like clockwork and vanished into my spreadsheet like clockwork. I set up 529 college savings plans for both children the month each of them was born, and I deposited 15% of every paycheck, not David's paycheck mine, without fail. I calculated it once. Over 12 years, that was 144 deposits for Lily, 60 deposits for Leo. I knew the exact balance in each account the way some people know their resting heart rate. Lily's fund, $38,000. Leo's fund, $14,000. Those numbers were not just savings. They were proof that I was doing my job not just as a senior financial analyst, but as a mother building futures one decimal point at a time. David was the visible one. The senior manager who flew to conferences in Dallas and Denver, who came home with stories about handshakes and client dinners at steakhouses where a single bottle of wine cost more than my weekly grocery run. I was the invisible one. I ironed his dress shirts on Tuesday nights, making sure the collar was crisp and the sleeves had no wrinkle because David had sensitive skin and anything less than perfect made him irritable. I kept a plate warm in the microwave every Wednesday evening when he texted that his partner meeting was running late. I believed those texts the way I believed the weather forecast automatically without inspection because doubting them would mean doubting the architecture of the life I had spent 15 years constructing. Those Wednesday meetings. Every single week, 8 months, 32 Wednesdays. I can describe the routine with my eyes closed because I lived it the way monks live. Prayer repetitions so deep, it becomes identity. At 5:15, I would leave the office, pick Leo up from after-school care drive, Lily to vocal lessons, swing through Mariano's, for whatever protein was on sale, and start cooking by 6. David liked his steak medium rare with rosemary. He liked his chicken parmesan with extra mozzarella. He liked his shirts ironed with the seams pressed sharp enough to cut paper. I knew the exact water temperature that prevented his collar from shrinking. I knew which drawer he expected his cufflinks in, and which shelf held the shoes he wore to client meetings versus the shoes he wore to the office. I knew his coffee order and his dry cleaning schedule and the way he folded his arms when he was lying and the way he tilted his head when he wanted me to stop talking. I knew everything about this man except the truth. By 7, the house was clean, the children were bathed, and his dinner was plated. I stood in the kitchen in my apron, the navy one with the small bleach stain on the pocket reheating, roast beef, or chicken parmesan, or whatever I had cooked specifically to his preference. I checked the clock at 8, at 9, at 9:30. I told myself he was working hard for us. I believed it because after 15 years, belief becomes a reflex. You stop questioning it the same way you stop questioning gravity. Now I know. Now I can calculate it with the precision that has always been my weapon and my weakness. 32 shirts ironed, 32 plates reheated, 32 evenings spent waiting for a man who walked through the door at 10:15, smelling like cigar smoke he claimed came from his partner Doug. Cigar smoke that was nothing more than a clumsy mask over the cheap vanilla perfume that Vanessa apparently bathed in. I wonder now how many of those lies he rehearsed in the car on the drive home, and how many came so easily he did not even need to think. I wonder if he laughed at me, the dutiful wife in the bleach-stained apron, standing under fluorescent kitchen light, keeping his dinner warm while he kept another woman warm 30 minutes away. I wonder if he told Vanessa about it. I try not to wonder, but some nights the wondering comes uninvited, and I let it sit with me until it gets bored and leaves. The cracks did not start the way I expected. They did not come from David's behavior, or a suspicious credit card charge, or a phone left unlocked on the counter. They came from my children, and that made them infinitely worse. Lily had always been sharp, first in her class, at math natural vocalist, the kind of 12-year-old who argued with teachers about historical accuracy and still crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. So when she started snapping at me over breakfast, I told myself it was hormones. When she rolled her eyes at my suggestion to practice piano, I told myself she was finding her independence. When she called me basic in front of her friend Madison, and they both laughed, I told myself that children test boundaries, and this was what growing up looked like. I told myself 100 things that year, each one a little thinner than the last. Then I found the lipstick. A tube of MAC Ruby Woo, $22, which I know because I checked the price later that night on my phone tucked inside the zippered pocket of Lily's backpack. A shade of crimson red that no 12-year-old needed and that I had explicitly told her she was too young to wear. I held it under the kitchen light and felt something cold move through my stomach. Lily shrugged when I confronted her. "Chill, Mom. Vanessa gave it to me. She says women who embrace beauty early become confident adults. She says people with artist souls like us need to express ourselves freely, not count pennies like—" She stopped herself, but I heard the rest of that sentence as clearly as if she had screamed it. "Like you, Mom. Like you." I told myself Vanessa was just a 26-year-old who did not understand boundaries. I told myself that David giving Lily's vocal coach rides home from lessons was simple politeness. I told myself the adoration in Lily's voice when she said Vanessa's name was just a girl's admiration for a young, exciting woman, the kind of admiration I could not compete with because I was 44, wore clearance coats, and smelled like dish soap instead of vanilla perfume. I was still telling myself these things on the afternoon of Leo's 5th birthday, the afternoon that ended every lie I had left. David had promised Leo an amusement park trip, the one with the small roller coaster that Leo had been talking about for 3 weeks, counting the days each morning on his fingers, holding up all 5 when the day finally arrived. Instead, David announced over breakfast that they would attend a special concert to broaden Leo's musical horizons. The concert where Vanessa was performing, a chamber music recital in a downtown hall with vaulted ceilings, dim lighting, and an audience of adults in black who sat in rigid silence for 2.5 hours. Leo lasted 40 minutes. He was 5 years old in a room designed for people 6 times his age, surrounded by darkness and echoing sounds and the rustle of programs and the sharp looks of strangers when he shifted in his seat. The tears started quietly, the kind a 5-year-old produces when he is trying desperately to be brave because his father told him to be a big boy. Then louder. Then the shaking. His small shoulders trembling in his birthday shirt, the blue one with the dinosaur on the front that he had picked out himself that morning because he thought he was going to ride a roller coaster. He reached for David's hand. David pulled away. That detail, Lily told me later, whispering in the hallway, as if afraid the words themselves might break something, is the one that lives behind my eyelids when I cannot sleep. Not the shouting. Not the crowd's disapproval. The fact that a 5-year-old boy reached for his father's hand in the dark and his father moved away from him. Because the music was playing, because Vanessa was on stage, because somewhere in the wiring of David's brain, a frightened child ranked below a lover's curtain call. David's face tightened. He gripped Leo's arm, not the way a father steadies a scared child, but the way someone removes an inconvenience and hauled him toward the exit. His eyes never left the stage. Vanessa was singing. The spotlight caught her hair and her open mouth and her raised hands, and David watched her the way he used to watch me years ago when I still believed I was worth watching. He chose the sound of her voice over the sound of his son crying. I was not there. Lily told me later in the hallway outside Leo's bedroom, her voice cautious, like she was handling something fragile. She described Leo's face, the snot, and the tears, and the way his small body shook, and as she spoke, something inside my chest shifted. Not cracked, shifted. The way tectonic plates move before an earthquake, the lipstick, the rides home, the Wednesday nights, the vanilla perfume on 32 shirt collars. They were not separate incidents. They were the same story told 32 different ways, and it was not going to stop. It was going to reach into the only part of my life that still felt sacred, my children, and hollow it out from the inside. I told myself one more time that maybe it would pass. That was the last lie I ever swallowed. 2 nights after the parking lot confrontation, after David had gone to bed, with the satisfied breathing of a man who believed his wife was too broken to be dangerous, I got up. The house was dark. The only sound was the furnace cycling and David snoring, that steady, arrogant rumble I had listened to for over 5,000 nights. I walked barefoot to his home office and opened his laptop. The password was Vanessa's birthday, June 15th. He had never remembered either of his children's birthdays without a calendar reminder, but he had memorized hers down to the keystroke. The irony tasted like metal. The email folder was labeled V Studio Plans. No encryption, no secondary password. He had not even tried to hide it. That is what arrogance does. It makes you so certain of your own superiority that you stop imagining anyone else could be smarter. The first document was a withdrawal confirmation from Fidelity Investments. 3 transactions over 4 months. $18,000 from Lily's 529 account in March. Another $20,000 in May, then $7,000 from Leo's in July. Total $45,000 in education savings drained from accounts I had funded with my own salary for over a decade, each transaction carrying a 10% early withdrawal penalty because the money was not being used for education. The penalties alone over $4,000 were burned like kindling. That $4,000 could have bought Leo's school supplies for 3 years. The second document was a signed lease agreement. A commercial space on North Milwaukee Avenue. Monthly rent $3,200. Lessee, David Mitchell. Operating name, Vanessa's Voice Studio. He was building her a music school with our children's college money. The third document stopped my breathing. A remortgage application for our Evanston home. David was refinancing the house where Lily had pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe, measuring every inch she had grown, where Leo kept his stuffed bear in the exact same spot on his pillow every night to extract $120,000 in equity. The application was 60% complete. He was 10 business days from submission. I slid off the desk chair and sat on the floor. The hardwood was cold against my bare legs. I could hear David snoring through the wall, rhythmic, untroubled, the breathing of a man sleeping on a mattress, bought with money his wife earned in a house, maintained by a woman he was planning to leave penniless. The ceiling fan turned above me in slow circles. The numbers scrolled through my head without permission. $45,000, $120,000, $4,000 in penalties, $3,200 per month in studio rent. I lay back on that cold floor and stared up at the blades of the fan and thought about 8,000 nights. That is roughly how many nights we had shared a bed. 8,000 nights of breathing the same air, and I did not know which of them were real and which were performances. I lay there for 20 minutes. Then something changed. It was not dramatic, no thunderclap, no sudden revelation. It was more like a thermostat clicking over. The tears on my cheeks dried. The numbers stopped scrolling and started organizing. $45,000 withdrawn. $12,600 in traceable expenditures on the affair. Penalties. Lease deposits. The withdrawal dates aligned with specific lies he had told me. July was the emergency dental work he said he needed. September was the investment opportunity he asked me not to question. My brain does this. It has always done this. It takes chaos and turns it into columns. It takes pain and converts it into data points. This is what makes me very good at my job. And right there on that cold floor, listening to the man who was stealing from his children snore like a newborn on the other side of the wall, the analyst in me woke up. And the wife in me, the trusting, apron-wearing, dinner-warming wife, closed her eyes for the last time. I sat up. I took my phone from my robe pocket. My hands were steady. I photographed every email, every bank statement, every page of the remortgage application, every line of the lease agreement. I saved every image to a cloud drive that David did not know existed, the same cloud account I used for work backups, encrypted, password protected, invisible to anyone who did not know to look. Then I closed the laptop and set it back at exactly the angle he had, left it slightly open, tilted 12 degrees toward the window. I had measured. I walked to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. I drank it in the dark, standing at the counter, and then I searched on my phone for the highest-rated divorce attorney in Cook County, Illinois. Her name was Clara Rodriguez. She had a 4.9 rating and a reputation that entered rooms before she did. The next 3 months were a masterpiece of deception, and I was both the artist and the canvas. During the day, I was the quiet wife. I cooked David's meals. I cleaned the house. I smiled when he spoke to me and nodded when he lied. I even complimented the new cologne he was wearing. Tom Ford a bottle that cost $185, purchased with our joint credit card, chosen by Vanessa, during a shopping trip I found on the Visa statement, but pretended not to see. Every word I said in those 3 months was a carefully delivered line in a play I was both writing and starring in, performed with the precision of a woman whose entire career depended on finding the number that did not belong. But I was being watched. My compliance must have disturbed something in David's narcissistic wiring, because his need for control mutated into something clinical. He installed a security camera in the living room, a small white unit with a blinking red LED mounted on the bookshelf between a family photo and a vase I had been given at our wedding. He told me it was for home security. Break-ins in the neighborhood, he said. He even showed me the app on his phone, magnanimous, as if inviting me to appreciate his thoughtfulness. Then during a routine oil change at Jiffy Lube, the mechanic called me over and pointed underneath my car. A magnetic GPS tracker. Black plastic rectangle the size of a cigarette pack attached to the rear axle. David was logging every mile I drove. A different woman might have ripped the tracker off and thrown it at his face. I drove home, parked in the garage, and went inside. The next morning, I paid cash for a prepaid phone at a Target in Skokie. $49 OID required no paper trail. I hid it inside a box of dryer sheets in the laundry room, which sat in the one corner of the house that the living room camera could not see. I had checked. I had stood in the living room and mapped the camera's field of view by walking grid patterns while David was at work measuring the blind spots with the patience of someone who understood that, in surveillance as in accounting, the gaps in coverage are where the truth lives. From that laundry room, sitting on the cold tile floor between the washer and a basket of Leo's small socks, I made the calls that would dismantle my marriage and save my children's futures. Claire Rodriguez was 53, silver-haired, and direct to the point of surgical precision. In our first meeting at her downtown office, while David's GPS showed my car parked at the dental clinic on Sherman Avenue, where I had left it in the lot, she listened to my story for 45 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned forward and said two things. The first was legal, and it changed everything. She explained that under Illinois law specifically, Section 503 of the Illinois Marriage and Dissolution of Marriage Act, David's withdrawal of marital funds for the exclusive benefit of his extramarital relationship, constituted dissipation of marital assets. Every dollar he had drained from the 529 accounts, every dinner he had charged every hotel room, every dollar of the studio lease, all of it was traceable, recoverable, and usable against him in court. The early withdrawal penalties from the 529 plans were particularly damning, she said, because they demonstrated not just financial infidelity, but willful destruction of assets specifically designated for the children's welfare. He did not just steal from you, Sarah. He stole from a 12-year-old and a 5-year-old. Judges in Cook County do not forget that. The second thing she said was personal. You are not his victim anymore. From this moment forward, you are my client, and we are going to make him wish he had never learned that woman's name. I believed her, not because she was dramatic, but because she said it with the same calm certainty I used when I told a CFO that his revenue projections were off by 11%. She had already done the math. I also found Dr. Alan Harris, a child psychologist Clara recommended, who specialized in cases involving parental alienation and emotional neglect. He began meeting with Leo twice a week at his downtown office sessions I drove Leo to during my lunch breaks, parking 3 blocks away so the GPS would show me near a sandwich shop, returning to work with granola bar crumbs on my blazer and a face that said nothing was wrong. Harris was patient and gentle, letting Leo draw with crayons and play with stuffed animals while he asked quiet questions. Those sessions would eventually produce something that shattered a courtroom into silence. But I did not know that yet. There were moments when the walls nearly closed in. One afternoon, I was kneeling in the laundry room, holding the burner phone to my ear, whispering to Clara about the remortgage timeline, while Leo sat on my lap, drawing circles on a piece of paper. He had been crying, the silent kind, the kind he had taught himself, so David would not hear and call him weak. His small head was pressed against my collarbone, and I was stroking his hair with my free hand and trying to keep my voice from breaking when I heard the front door open. Keys in the lock. Footsteps in the hall. David was home 2 hours early. 5 seconds. I shoved the phone under a pile of dirty towels, wiped my face with the back of my hand, lifted Leo onto my hip, grabbed a glass from the utility sink and filled it with water, stepped out of the laundry room into the hallway and straight into the camera's view, holding my son and a glass of water and a smile that cost me more effort than anything I had ever done in my professional career. "Just getting him some water," I said. David looked at me, looked at Leo, looked at the glass. "You baby him too much," he said, and walked past us toward his office. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth, but my face was a lake in winter, frozen still showing nothing of what moved beneath. There was a second moment worse than the first. A Saturday morning. David was supposedly at the gym. I was in the laundry room photographing bank statements I had pulled from his desk drawer when I heard his car in the driveway. He had forgotten his water bottle. I had 14 documents spread across the dryer. I stacked them, shoved them into the basket of clean towels, and began folding. By the time David walked through the kitchen, I was holding a warm towel against my chest and humming. He grabbed the water bottle from the counter, said, "The house smells nice," and left. The documents were under the towel. My hands did not start shaking until his car pulled away. I stood there trembling over a basket of laundry and thought, this is what it means to fight for your children from inside a cage. You smile at the bars, you pet the lock, and you file your nails into keys when no one is looking. Over those months, the file grew. Clara secured an emergency court order freezing the remortgage filed and granted 9 days before David planned to submit the final paperwork to the bank. He never knew who stopped it. He blamed bank bureaucracy. I let him believe that the way I let him believe I was the kind of woman who would never fight back. One night when David was asleep and the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, I sat on the laundry room floor and spread the full inventory around me. Every document Clara and I had assembled over 3 months, organized by category, time-stamped, cross-referenced. I needed to see it all together, not as fragments gathered in whispered phone calls, but as a single unified case. 8 months of deception. 23 confirmed meetings between David and Vanessa, documented through credit card charges, restaurant receipts, and the GPS data from his own car that I had quietly mirrored to a separate app. $45,000 drained from the children's college funds. $12,600 in additional expenditures, dinners, hotels, gifts, the lease deposit for the studio. 147 text messages recovered from a cloud backup, including one sent at 9:47 on a Tuesday night while I was reading Leo a bedtime story 1 floor below. She is upstairs being boring as usual. Wish I was with you instead of performing husband duties. Performing husband duties. 15 years, reduced to 4 words and a verb that made our entire marriage sound like community service. But the piece that made me close my eyes and grip the edge of the washing machine was not about me. It was the incident report from Leo's preschool teacher, Mrs. Whitfield, handwritten on school letterhead, signed and dated. On a Thursday afternoon in May, Leo had tripped on the playground and scraped his knee badly enough to bleed through his jeans. Mrs. Whitfield called David, who was the emergency contact that day. He arrived in 11 minutes. He looked at the blood on his son's knee, looked at his watch, and said, Mrs. Whitfield wrote this in quotation marks because she could not believe it either. We need to hurry up. Miss Vanessa hates when people are late. He carried Leo to the car without cleaning the wound. A 5-year-old boy with blood running down his shin, and his father's only concern was arriving on time to pick up a 26-year-old woman who needed a ride to a cosmetic store. I closed the file, but one piece pulled me back. The audio recording from Lily's iPad. I had not listened to it in full before I had only read the transcript Clara's office prepared. Now sitting on the laundry room floor at midnight, I pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled the small speaker, warm, confiding, the voice of a woman who had perfected the art of sounding like a friend. Your mom means well, sweetie, but she is a numbers person. She does not understand passion. She does not understand sacrifice for art. You and me, we are different. We are special. And sometimes special people have to leave behind the people who hold them down. I listened to my daughter's voice on the recording say, "You mean Mom?" And Vanessa laughed a light musical laugh that sounded like wind chimes and made me want to put my fist through the dryer door and said, "I mean anyone who clips your wings, baby." She had been grooming my child. Not with money, though, there was that too. With language. With the seductive lie that sensitivity requires cruelty, that talent excuses betrayal, that love is a cage that real artists must escape. She was teaching my daughter to leave me the same way she was teaching my husband to leave me by calling the leaving beautiful. I turned the recording off. I picked up the USB drive from the dryer, a small silver rectangle cold and heavy in my palm, holding every document, every screenshot, every recording, every report. Everything I needed to end my marriage and save my children's futures was inside that 2-inch piece of metal. Clara had called me that afternoon. "We are ready, Sarah. Everything is in order. The moment you say go, we move." I turned the USB over in my hand. Tomorrow was Friday. David's annual company conference began Monday morning in Milwaukee, 3 days, 2 nights guaranteed absence. He would leave at 6 with his garment bag and his confidence and his absolute narcissistic certainty that the woman at home was too obedient, too stupid, too invisible to do anything but wait. Monday was also the day I had rented a moving truck, the day Chloe had cleared her schedule, the day Clara would file the divorce petition and the emergency custody motion simultaneously. David did not know about any of it, and his not knowing that bottomless, breathtaking arrogance was going to be the thing that destroyed him. Monday, 5:30 in the morning. The alarm sounded and David rose the way he always did, shower-shaved navy suit. I handed him coffee in his travel mug. He kissed the top of my head without looking at me, the way you pat a piece of furniture on your way out the door. "Back Wednesday," he said. I nodded. I watched his car pull out of the driveway, turn left on Maple Avenue, and disappear. Then I picked up my phone and called Chloe. Chloe arrived within the hour in her husband's pickup truck, 2 rolls of packing tape in the passenger seat, and an expression that combined 20 years of friendship with barely contained fury. The moving truck I had rented was due at 8. It arrived at 8:45 with a dead battery. For 45 minutes, we stood in the driveway, staring at a truck that would not start, while Gerald, our neighbor, a retired postal worker, with an attention to other people's business that bordered on professional, made 4 separate trips to his mailbox. His mail carrier did not deliver until 2 in the afternoon. "Smile at Gerald," Chloe muttered through her teeth. "He is 100% going to call David." I smiled at Gerald. "Spring cleaning," I called out, waving. Gerald waved back and walked inside, slowly, looking over his shoulder twice. The mechanic arrived at 9:30. By 10:15, the engine turned over. By noon, Chloe and I had loaded everything that mattered: Leo's stuffed animals and books, Lily's guitar and sheet music, and the trophy she won at a choir competition in 4th grade, my grandmother's china, the children's school records, my home office filing cabinet, and 14 years of photo albums. We left David's belongings untouched. We left Vanessa's things, a silk scarf draped over a chair, a pair of earrings on the bathroom counter, a half-empty bottle of her vanilla perfume arranged neatly in the center of the kitchen table like a still life of bad decisions. The last thing I placed on the table was the GPS tracker from under my car. I set it down on top of the divorce petition, which sat on top of the emergency custody filing, which sat on top of a 3-page summary of the 529 withdrawals. A tidy stack. Every tool he had used to control me, converted into evidence against him, and arranged like a place setting for one. The rental house was 20 minutes away, a 4-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood that Clara's office had arranged. Smaller than the Evanston house. No granite countertops, but it had locks on every door and no cameras on any shelf. And when I turned the deadbolt behind us for the first time, the sound it made was the most beautiful thing I had heard in months. 1 week later, I sat in a conference room at the Cook County Courthouse with Clara on my right, a legal pad in front of her, and a banker's box at her feet. Across the polished table, David arrived 7 minutes late, wearing a tie I did not recognize. and an expression of pure, weaponized contempt. His attorney, a younger man named Fitch, who clearly had not read the full case file, shuffled papers without making eye contact. David opened with an attack. He leaned forward, planted both palms on the table, and told the mediator, a gray-haired woman named Judge Kowalski, that I was mentally unstable, that I had kidnapped the children, that I had looted the family home, that he was the stable parent, the provider, the one who held the family together while his wife, and here he pointed at me, finger extended, voice climbing, spiraled out of control. He used the word hysterical. He used the word irrational. He used words that men have used against women for centuries, whenever the women stopped obeying. Clara let him finish. She waited 3 full seconds after his last word, long enough for the silence to become its own kind of statement. The ventilation system hummed above the ceiling tiles. Someone's pen clicked. Then Clara opened the banker's box. Layer 1. She placed the 529 account statements on the table. 3 transactions highlighted in yellow marker. $38,000 from Lily's account. $7,000 from Leo's. Total $45,000. Transferred to a personal checking account registered solely under David Mitchell. Clara read the dates and amounts the way a doctor reads test results, clearly, without inflection, letting the numbers carry their own devastation. David's face changed. The red drained out of it like someone had pulled a plug. He opened his mouth. Fitch grabbed his arm. Layer 2. The remortgage application stamped with the emergency freeze order. Clara explained that the respondent had attempted to leverage $120,000 in equity from a home financed primarily by Sarah's salary contributions over 15 years to fund a commercial venture benefiting a non-marital party. She cited dissipation of marital assets 3 times. Layer 3. The audio transcript of Vanessa's recorded statements to Lily, captured from a voice memo on the child's iPad. Clara read one line aloud into the record. Your mother is a failure, Lily. She will steal your chance to shine. People like us artists, we see the world differently. She will never understand. The mediator's jaw tightened. Fitch put his pen down. Then Clara opened her laptop. She turned the screen so that David could see it clearly. Your Honor, she said to the mediator, this is a video recorded during supervised therapeutic sessions conducted by Dr. Alan Harris, a licensed child psychologist, with the couple's 5-year-old son, Leo. It has been submitted as evidence with full legal authorization and parental consent. She pressed play. The screen showed a small room with warm lighting and a blue rug. Leo sat cross-legged on the floor, clutching his stuffed bear, the brown one, with the torn ear that I had sewn back together 3 times. His dinosaur shirt, his small fingers gripping the bear so tightly that the stuffing bulged. Dr. Harris spoke gently from off-camera, and then Leo spoke. I hate Daddy. His voice was thin and shaking. I do not need a daddy who throws me away. I do not need a daddy who always... His chin buckled. He pressed his face into the bear. Who always makes mommy cry. The room stopped. The mediator's pen paused mid-word. Fitch stared at his own hands. David looked at the screen, and something behind his eyes came apart, not with a crack, but with a long, slow collapse, like a building losing its foundation, floor by floor. His mouth opened. No sound came out. For the first time in 15 years, David Mitchell, the man who always had an answer, always had a spin, always had a version of reality, where he was the hero, had nothing. No script, no charm, no argument. Just a small boy on a screen saying the truest words anyone had spoken in that room. Clara closed the laptop. She slid the settlement agreement across the table. Full custody to Sarah. Supervised visitation every 3 weeks. Child support at the maximum guideline rate. Restoration of the full $45,000 to the children's education accounts from David's personal assets. A permanent injunction barring Vanessa from any contact with the children. David's hand shook as he picked up the pen. The ballpoint scratched across the signature line, a small harsh sound like something tearing at the seam. He capped the pen with a click that echoed off the walls. Final. Irreversible. Done. I stood up. I thanked the mediator. I walked down the hallway through the courthouse lobby, past the metal detectors and the security guard who held the door open for me without knowing what I had just done. The November air hit my face like cold water. The sky was the color of ash. A bus passed on California Avenue, its brakes squealing its windows, full of faces going somewhere else. And I stood on the courthouse steps and breathed deep, slow, like surfacing after being held underwater for a very long time. The sound of my shoes on the concrete as I walked to the parking garage, click, 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 was steady and unhurried and even. I did not look back. I did not need to. Everything behind me was already over. David's world collapsed with a speed that surprised even Clara. Without money to fund Vanessa's lifestyle, without the studio, without the dinners, without the promise of a future built on someone else's savings, the fantasy evaporated like perfume in winter air. Vanessa lasted 11 days after the settlement. On the 12th, she blocked David's phone number, deleted their shared photos from social media, and posted a picture the following weekend with a 40-year-old film director who owned a brownstone in Lincoln Park. The artist's soul had found a richer patron. She did not even bother with a goodbye. She simply vanished the way people vanish when the credit line runs out. David called Chloe 3 times because I had blocked every number he tried. Each call was shorter than the last. Each time his voice was thinner, smaller. Chloe said it sounded like a man speaking from the bottom of a hole that was getting deeper. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Cicero, 40 minutes from every version of his life that had ever mattered. The apartment had beige walls and a window that faced a parking lot. He ate takeout every night from the same Chinese restaurant on Cermak Road because he had never learned to cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. His shirts went to the dry cleaner now, $3.50. Each 5 shirts a week, $17.50, that used to be free because his wife ironed them on Tuesday nights while watching the evening news. His supervisor put him on a performance improvement plan in January. By February, he was eating lunch alone in his car. The ironed shirts, the warm dinners, the organized calendar, and the packed lunches, and the managed tax documents, all the invisible labor I had performed for 15 years, the labor he never saw and never valued gone. And without it, David Mitchell could not hold the shape of his own life. But David's unraveling was background noise. What happened 3 weeks after the settlement was not. It was a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen of the rental house wiping down the counter when I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. I opened it and found Lily standing in the hallway, in her pajamas arms, wrapped around herself, face swollen and wet, looking younger than her 12 years, looking for a moment like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during storms. "Mom," she said. Just that. One syllable suspended in the air between us like something breakable. I waited. "Vanessa blocked me." Her voice cracked. I texted her because I was nervous about my school recital, and she blocked me. Like I was nothing. Like I never mattered to her at all. I pulled her inside. She collapsed against my chest, and the sobs came messy and ugly and enormous, the kind of crying a 12-year-old produces when she discovers that someone she loved was only pretending. "Mom, I am so sorry." She could barely get the words out between breaths. "She told me you were the problem. She said you were holding me back. She said artists like us had to stick together, and you would never understand, and I believed her. I believed her over you. I said horrible things to you, and you never once yelled at me. You just kept making my lunch and driving me to school and checking my homework, and I was so cruel to you, and She could not finish. I held her tighter. I pressed my chin into the top of her head into hair that smelled like the strawberry shampoo she had been using since she was 9, and I let her cry until the shaking slowed. "I am sorry," she whispered again, "for standing with the person who made you cry." And then for the first time in this entire story, for the first time through the parking lot and the cold floor and the laundry room and the courtroom, I cried. Not the silent tears I had swallowed for months. Real tears. Loud and warm and uncontrolled, and full of everything I had stored behind my ribs since the night I lay on the hardwood floor and watched the ceiling fan turn. I cried because my daughter came back. because the bridge Vanessa tried to burn was still standing. Because holding Lily in that moment felt like winning something no settlement could ever grant proof that my child saw me, truly saw me, and chose me. Leo wandered in a few minutes later, rubbing his eyes, confused by the noise. He climbed onto the bed and pushed himself between us like a small, warm anchor. "Why is everyone crying?" he asked. Lily laughed through her tears. "Happy crying, Leo." He thought about this. "Can I happy cry too?" We pulled him in, three of us tangled and damp and breathing together on my bed in the small rental house. The shoulder of my pajama top was soaked through where Lily's face had been. I wore it to bed that night, wet and salty and warm, and slept better than I had in a year. 6 months later, I painted the bedroom. Ocean blue, 3 coats. Not the neutral gray David had mandated for every room in every home we had ever shared, the color he called smart for resale, and I called giving up. I chose the bluest blue on the swatch wall at the hardware store, a shade called deep water, and I rolled it on myself. The sound of the roller against the drywall, a wet, rhythmic swish, filled the room like music. By the 3rd coat, the morning sun hit the fresh paint and turned it electric, and I stood back and thought, this is the first wall in 15 years that is exactly the color I wanted. My promotion came through in April. Senior Director of Financial Analysis, with a 30% raise, and a corner office with a window that faced Lake Michigan. My supervisor called it long overdue. I did not argue. I had spent 15 years being excellent at a job that paid me to find the truth in numbers. Now the excellence had my name on the door. Lily's school talent show was in May. She had been rehearsing for weeks, not the dark, melancholy art songs Vanessa had pushed on her, but a simple, bright melody about home that she had found on her own. I sat in the 3rd row between Chloe and a woman whose name I did not catch, and I watched my daughter walk onto a stage where the spotlight turned her hair gold and her shadow long. She sang beautifully. Her voice cracked once on a high note, and she recovered with a small laugh that made the whole auditorium fall in love with her. When the judges called first place and Lily walked back to the microphone holding the trophy, she looked down into the audience, found my face, and said with steady eyes and a voice that did not waver, "This is for my mom." 3 words. I did not hear anything else for a long time after that. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen and ground coffee beans. I brewed a single cup, black, no milk, no sugar. For 15 years, David had made morning coffee for both of us, always with whole milk and 2 sugars, because that was how he drank it. And at some point, I had stopped mentioning that I preferred mine different. I never corrected him, because by the time it might have mattered, the habit had calcified into fact, and challenging it felt like starting a fight over something too small to justify the argument. But it was not small. It was one of 100 tiny surrenders that accumulated over 15 years into a woman who had forgotten her own preferences. I took a sip. Bitter and clean and real. I had always liked it this way. I just needed the freedom to remember. There were still difficult nights. One Thursday in October, I woke at 3 in the morning with my heart racing from a dream I could not remember, except that David was in it, and he was laughing. I lay in the dark and reached across the bed, 15 years of muscle memory, a hand searching for a body that was no longer there. Cool sheets, empty space. The radiator clicked and ticked. I pulled the blanket tighter and stared at the ceiling and let the loneliness sit on me like weather. Not every night was easy. Not every morning started with clarity. Some days I caught myself checking the clock at 5:15, out of habit, expecting to start the old routine, pick up Leo, drop off Lily, buy groceries, start dinner, iron a shirt. The routine was gone, but the grooves it had carved in my nervous system remained like tracks in snow after the train has passed. Healing was not a straight line. It was more like weather some days, sun, some days rain, and the occasional Thursday at 3 in the morning when the bed felt too wide and the house felt too quiet, and I missed not a man, but the idea that someone was supposed to be there. But here is what I discovered in those quiet hours. I was not a morning person. For 15 years, I had gone to bed at 10, because David woke at 5:30 and I had organized my entire internal clock around his schedule without questioning it. Alone, I found that my mind sharpened after 9 at night. I started reading again novels, not spreadsheets with a lamp on, and no one telling me the light was keeping them up. I read until midnight sometimes later, and woke when I woke, and the freedom of that small rebellion surprised me with its sweetness. There were so many things I did not know about myself. 15 years of living inside someone else's preferences had buried them like seeds under concrete, and now one by one they were pushing through. And every morning, early or late, rested or not, I made black coffee and sat by the east-facing window and watched the sky lighten over the neighborhood rooftops. Alone, but not lonely. There is a difference, and it took me 44 years to learn it. On a Friday evening in December, I opened my email and found a court notification. David had voluntarily filed a motion to reduce his supervised visitation from every 3 weeks to once every 2 months. The stated reason was financial hardship and psychological distress. He could not afford the gas for the drive. He could not maintain the requirements. He was in his own legal filing, unable to sustain the basic obligations of fatherhood. I read the email once. I clicked archive. I closed the laptop. I did not think about it again until the next morning, and even then, only briefly. The man who had stood in a parking lot and declared his children less important than a 26-year-old woman's voice studio had now submitted that declaration to a court of law. He was right in the end. They were never his priority. The difference was that this fact no longer had the power to wound me. It was just data, a column of numbers that balanced to zero. He had subtracted himself from our lives, and the equations still held. We still worked. We were, in fact, better. That same Friday night, late December, a Chicago winter pressing against the windows with its usual ferocity, wind off the lake snow, accumulating on ledges the kind of cold that makes you grateful for every wall between you and the world. Lily was sprawled on the living room rug, playing a board game with Leo, who was winning through a combination of beginner's luck and cheerful cheating that Lily pretended not to notice. I sat in the armchair I had found at an estate sale the month before, deep green, soft arms, the kind of chair that holds you the way you always wanted to be held, with a mug of black coffee warming my hands. The fireplace was lit. I had built the fire myself newspaper, kindling 2 oak logs from the hardware store on Dempster Street. The flames moved behind the glass screen, casting a warm, amber-red glow across the room. Across Leo's small hands, moving game pieces. Across Lily's hair, falling over her eyes as she laughed. Across the blue wall I had painted with my own hands. Red light. I had lived inside red light before. The cold, stuttering blink of an apartment sign in a parking lot on the worst night of my life. The unblinking eye of a surveillance camera mounted on a bookshelf in my own living room, watching me perform the role of obedient wife. Red light had meant control, exposure, betrayal. But this red light was different. This red light was warm. It came from a fire I had built in a house I had chosen, in a room where no one was watching, and no one was tracking, and no one was keeping score. Outside, the storm pushed against the glass. Inside, my children were laughing, and I was drinking coffee that tasted exactly the way I wanted it to taste. Leo cheated again. Lily caught him this time, and they both dissolved into the kind of laughter that fills a room and pushes the cold a little further away. I took a sip of coffee and let the warmth move through me from my hands to my chest, to somewhere deeper, somewhere that had been hollow for 15 years and was now quietly and completely full. If this story reached you, if it reminded you of your own strength or the strength of someone you love, I would be grateful if you shared it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me your story. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Every story I tell is for women who were told they were not enough. You are enough. You have always been enough. And it is never too late to pour your own coffee.